come with me, if you will, back in time for an extremely truncated origin story. Back in 2007, I started working at a software company that was often in those most desirable places to work lists. What a pile of crap those are. The environment was extremely different. It was very casual, and that extended far beyond just being able to wear jeans and t-shirts. The upper levels came across as a bunch of aging college kids, and they thought it was fun to do things like bring alcohol into the environment during the workday for employees. Seriously. When I started there, I was in my late 30s and had just come from a brief period working IT in a law firm. A horrible experience indeed. Being this age, I was already very out of the ordinary from the generally very young employee base at this new job. The company was notorious for being very difficult to get into, often requiring multiple interviews before any possible offer was made. I was hired on the spot during my first interview, and it had little to do with my qualifications. At the time, I was trying to advance my IT career beyond phone tech support. Did you turn it off and back on? I wanted a more hands-on position. This would be that opportunity. The hiring manager made an impression. He was several years younger than me, and his behavior right away was odd. He asked me questions that he's not supposed to, such as if I was married or had kids. But it was his body language that really stood out. I pushed any concerns aside and just looked forward to starting the new job. Not long after I started, my two direct coworkers were fired on the same day for their behavior. Barely into this new job, I was suddenly the senior tech. I embraced the challenge and excelled. During this time, my manager would often call me into his office. He would keep me there sometimes for hours, complaining to me in graphic detail about his home life with the wife and kiddies. He was heavily religious and had no problem cramming it down people's throats, almost insisting they attend his church. One coworker admitted he had gone to this church, stating he felt pressured to do so. That wasn't going to happen with me, and I made that clear during one of his recruitment attempts. I enjoyed the company's kind of playful environment and quickly built a great reputation. There was something off about the general vibe of the place, and some of us would occasionally refer to it as a cult. There were comments about drinking the Kool-Aid to succeed. That often meant being in your 20s, married with kids, and loving sports. Being generic and very conformist were the standard. If you ever expressed anything that could be perceived as less than total satisfaction, you'd be met with a creepy, "Sounds like you're unhappy here." Even though I had a team leader who had hair down to his ass and the word hate tattooed across his knuckles, people often thought I was the leader because I was much more the face of the department. My manager would regularly want me to be open and forthcoming during these oddball closed-door meetings he was often calling me to in his office, which was a very misguided effort on his part to bond. I would tell him that I prefer to keep personal and professional separate. He would get upset by this. He knew I was an avid bicyclist and started asking if I'd be open to others joining me. I told him it's my me time and I like to keep it a solitary activity. The fact is, his intentions were very questionable. As the months rolled on, the relationship became very bizarre. He began scrutinizing anything about me that he felt was negative towards him. By this time, I had started keeping a journal of many of these weird interactions. He would call me to his office because he believed if I saw him in the hallway and turned the other way, it was to avoid him. He once told me that when I walked by him, I stared at him coldly and it hurt. When I told him he had begun to make me uncomfortable and I was making efforts to avoid him, he broke down in tears at his desk, telling me how much I had hurt his feelings. The behavior began extending outside of his office, and my coworkers would see these oversensitive tiffs. He'd walk into the team's office and misinterpret something I'd say or didn't say. A spat would break out while I tried to assure him I'm just working and not directing anything, silent or spoken, towards him. Coworkers began to refer to us as a married couple. I was in a constant state of high alert. With each resisted attempt on his part to move our interaction outside of the job, he would retaliate against me. I was being scrutinized if I let out a sigh or if I used a specific benign word in an email. He would use each opportunity to call me into his office to discuss. Over the next year, nothing really changed. The manager was constantly resentful towards me and continuously trying to cause problems. But his behavior had now been recognized not only by HR, but by his own manager. He had been told to, quote, quit worrying about Scott and focus on your job. He had tried to write me up and create performance improvement plans, all of which were blocked by his boss. Everyone seemed to recognize the questionable fixation this guy had. I eventually found out he had a keylogger on my computer to watch everything I typed. Around late summer 2009, I was laying in bed on a weekend morning thinking about all of the insanity at work. My heart started beating erratically, feeling like a frog jumping in my chest. What the hell was this? I got lightheaded and wondered if I was having a heart attack. I tried to calm down and start the morning, but it wasn't going away. I scrawled out a quick will and testament and sent a text to my sister. These were the days of flip phones, so it was pressing a button multiple times to get to the letter I needed. I just wanted there to be some sort of record in case I did drop dead. I'm not the type to run to the ER for everything. I took a hot shower, and that's when things started calming down. It was curious for sure, but I didn't know what to make of it. The event lasted about 90 minutes. A few weeks later, the same thing happened during another weekend morning laying in bed thinking about all the crap at work. Again, it was about 90 minutes before it resolved, and I made a doctor's appointment. During the appointment, I registered high blood pressure for the first time ever and explained what was happening in my chest on these occasions. We just called them palpitations, but later they were found to be an arrhythmia called atrial fibrillation, or AFib. This is an irregular heartbeat that considerably increases stroke risk. This condition generally doesn't appear until someone is senior citizen age. I wasn't even 40. Later on, when HR gave the manager specific instructions to leave me the hell alone, he began pulling the team leader, who I had a decent relationship with, into the middle. He would give his complaints to the team leader to relay to me as a workaround for not being able to tell me himself. The team leader would start by sheepishly telling me he didn't have a problem, but that he was being directed by the manager to bring it to my attention. I told him about the recent doctor appointment and what had been happening physically. This needed to stop. My time with the company ended soon after. It was just too damn much. Even though they recognized his bizarre behavior, they were clearly never going to hold that lunatic, repressed, closet case bully accountable, purely because he was management. I would eventually read stories about HR and managers, how companies will often let inappropriate manager behavior slide when directed at a subordinate because there's larger liability admitting management failure. After leaving the job, the episodes of AFib would occur now and then, often associated with stressful situations. This was apparently the baggage I now had to carry with me because of that great place to work. After a week-long episode of AFib in 2013, I was put on a medication called Ridmol. Since my AFib was no longer stopping on its own, the pill would knock it out, but it would take an hour or two. Since then, I would take this pill on the occasions I'd go into AFib, maybe once every 2 or 3 months. Cardiologists had suggested a procedure called cardiac ablation in an effort to reduce the frequency. This is an outpatient procedure that involves going in through a blood vessel in the groin area and moving up to the heart. Areas of the heart are then burned with the intention of creating scar tissue that can often block the misdirected electrics that kick off AFib. I felt that my occurrences were infrequent enough that the pill was sufficient. The stroke risk of the procedure itself was also not something I wanted to tempt fate with. In January 2024, I was laying on the couch during a typical Ohio winter's day thinking about all of the bullshit with the business when my heart started acting up. It wasn't AFib, and it wasn't nonstop. It was intermittent flutters and jumps, delays and squeezing. What the hell was this? I took my pill, but rather than the usual 1 to 2 hours to work, it took over 3. Maybe it was because of it being constant but intermittent? After it stopped, that was the last I thought of it. In February 2024, these irregularities started again. This time, it lasted for a week. With AFib, once the pill knocked it out, it would stay gone, often for months at a time. With this new issue, once the pill would kick in, it would only last for a handful of hours and the symptoms returned. Over the next months, the frequency of occurrences continued to increase until it was near constant every day. By June 2024, only 6 months since the first episode, I was now taking 300 milligrams of Ribmol twice a day, up from the previous 150 milligrams once as needed. The cardiologist caught the arrhythmia in an EKG and said it's not as bad as AFib, even though for me it felt worse because it was daily. He again suggested ablation since it could knock out symptoms sometimes for up to 10 years. I began giving it serious thought. Like with AFib, when this arrhythmia would kick up, I could get lightheaded and end up with a raging headache, often wondering if a stroke was soon to follow. After I was told in March 2024 that CDs would be back on the table for me, I asked my primary licensing contact about some of the pending ones, such as a Visage 2 CD edition of the singles collection that I had submitted some time ago. This was going to be an expanded compilation, including extended mixes, other single edits, and a couple of rare tracks that had yet to be put to CD. For this and some others, he said the titles haven't been touched by the repertoire owners, so probably best just to disregard them. Here's a thought. Why not take some time away from planning your next vacation, get off your lazy ass, and send a nudge email to the rep owners, as has been the way of the gods since the beginning of time? Although, when I sent that suggestion, I sterilized my irritation out of it. Around this time is when I tried sending a message to my buddy in the USA archives looking for a master tape list, but got a bounce back that he had been a casualty of the recent layoffs. I reached out to another in the USA archives to see if he could provide the list. I had worked with him a few times in the past, and he was okay, but far less willing to assist with inquiries. When he replied to this latest inquiry, rather than just sending over the list, he introduced me to the guy who was taking over the responsibilities for my departed pal. I sent a further message clarifying to this new contact what I was looking for. No response. As I often did, I looked this person up on LinkedIn and found that he was already a UMG veteran. Oh, okay. So he's already long since had his treat your clients like garbage gold ribbon. Never mind. I wasn't going to start struggling for communication with someone new. In April, I asked my primary contact if there were any issues finishing up the split end CDs. He replied and said he's not aware of any problems with split ends. Then what's the holdup? Wasn't Frenzy cleared more than a year ago? I finally received clearance for Frenzy on May 31st, 2024, nearly a year and a half after I was originally told it had been cleared. You know, prior to them cutting CDs off from me and hiding that fact for a year. This would be the first time the USA edition of Frenzy would have a CD release. When this 1979 album came out in the USA and Europe in 1981, some songs had been remixed, others came from an earlier recording session. Only one song remained in its original form. I noticed this clearance also indicated it's approved for a single 1,000 unit pressing only, no second or future pressings. That's when I started getting the impression this is a new direction they were taking, forcing these licenses to now be one and done only. I asked final clearance about the other ends titles and was told a couple of others were about cleared, but just needed a minor adjustment before the confirmations would come my way. Since I had all of the main album transfers, I went ahead and did the remastering for all of the album tracks while working Frenzy toward production. I submitted my artwork for Frenzy on June 18th and got approval on June 20th. On July 16th, I received the invoice for Frenzy and paid it right away. As of that time, the contract was signed, the invoice for the master rights had been received and paid, artwork had cleared, and everything had moved into production with the manufacturer. On July 18th, 2024, I sent out a newsletter and posted on social media about the upcoming Frenzy reissue and that other titles will soon be announced. Feedback was very enthusiastic, and I felt I might have another decent catalog to keep things moving into the future of increasing challenges. Two of my past success stories, Oingo Boingo and Missing Persons, had been cut off, and I was now being given crap about Visage. Their stinginess about catalogs after I had proven demand was getting extreme, so I felt Split Ends could at least keep it going for a little while. The same day of the Frenzy announcement, the following was posted on Facebook by Eddie Rayner from the band.
Frenzy was never remixed in 1981. That's a fact. We tolerated the original mixes until I remixed it much later, maybe around 2009. I remixed the Luton tapes around that time too. I wonder if whoever these people are know what they're releasing and whether they actually have the official right.
Okay, so we have another band member who is having an issue with one of my approved and cleared reissues. Nothing new there. He's also apparently having a senior moment when it comes to the remixing of the album, which from what I understand, he was behind back in 1981. Since I had asked my primary licensing contact in April specifically about any possible issues with this catalog and told there didn't appear to be any, I tried to remain confident that things will carry on since my green light came from the USA rights owner of the catalog. On July 19th, during my afternoon bike ride, I received a message from my primary UMG licensing contact set with high priority. I pulled over and read in horror the following message, in part.
I have some very unfortunate news. We are going to have to pull the license for Frenzy, and I won't be able to clear any further Split Ends releases for you. The artist has reached out to us and does not want this release to happen, as they have other plans for the catalog. Thanks for your understanding.
I was in a nightmare. I could not believe what I was reading. Split Ends is not a band who have an approval clause, and I had licensed the compilation LP without issue. So this was UMG licensing taking it upon themselves to throw me under the bus in favor of a band whose catalog they'd not done anything with in nearly 40 years. I was livid. The cherry on top of the patronizing message was the "thanks for your understanding." How presumptuous. It was apparently my own fault. I had come across as rolling with it when things have had problems in the past, tolerating all of their crap while remaining so carefully polite in email that they seemed to assume, with as much as I had already tolerated, this shouldn't be any different, right? Wrong. I immediately turned the bike around and thundered at lightning speed back to my car, feeling the venom dripping from the sides of my mouth. He didn't say anything like, "We'll try to get you other titles soon in an effort to compensate for our spineless behavior." It was just a message informing me that despite contracts and payments being received, they were screwing me over because of a little bitch move by a band member's territorial pissing. Bitter? You bet. Tell me you wouldn't be. As far as their own plans for the catalog, let's clear this up. The albums are owned by Warner in Australia and New Zealand, not UMG. UMG have the rights in the other territories and do not have to answer to the band on reissues, which is in the contracts these bands signed back in the day. Regardless of anyone's viewpoint on this, it's what the artist signed. If there are any requirements to notify the artist of reissues, it's the label who owns the catalog, not the licensee. The band's plans were to try to do anniversary reissues for the albums as those dates rolled around, and if Warner were open to it. Nothing had been set firm, but with my contracts only being good for 3 years, and with Frenzy having an original release year of 1979, it would be 5 years until they got to that album in the discography, and by that time my stock would have been long gone, and the contracts, for this and any others that were forthcoming, would have been expired for some time. When I got back to the car, I finally lessened the pleasantries and sent my primary contact a pissed-off message about their inability to do the job of clearing titles properly, and asked if there's anything else that can come my way to compensate for this latest issue. I emphasized that all work had been done and monies paid, and asked if it would take another half a year to be refunded again. He should be doing damage control. Instead, no response. You spineless piece of shit. I guess he didn't like someone actually standing up to him and calling him out on being a jerk. What's the matter? Is your tiara crooked? People in upper levels often develop that superiority complex, and I'm sure he's used to having people bow down to his greatness. Not me, pal. I should also mention that the album Split Ends might put back out are said to likely be remixed yet again. So, other than my stock being gone and contracts expired by that time, they would have been the mixes that people know, not these George Lucas-like tinkerings Rayner can't seem to stop doing. Over the weekend, my heart would not settle down. I popped my medication like candy, but was in such a state of distress, rage, panic, and horror that nothing was going to restore normal rhythm. I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I hate these people. The whole situation with UMG licensing had become too toxic. It's now impossible to continue. With my primary contact having destroyed any faith I had in him at the end of 2023 by revealing how he had been exploiting my list of reissue requests towards vinyl because it was to their benefit, I couldn't move forward after this. I just couldn't. I'm not from Stepford.
I'll just die if I don't get this recipe.
After years of pushing through this vampiric, soul-sucking situation, the constant teeth-gritting and tension caught up with me on a physical level. I could either choose to attempt to continue in the "thank you, sir, may I have another" manner in which these labels had become accustomed, with a further decline in my, well, everything, or finally get the self-respect to say, "to hell with this." They always had a habit of making clients feel humiliated and degraded, like gnats buzzing around their head. A necessary irritation as an unwanted part of their job description. It came off as if they gave you even seconds of their valuable time. You should feel privileged and thankful. But they had absolutely no problem wasting my time and money without the slightest concern. And it regularly seemed as if they wanted to shoo clients away. He hadn't given his actions of pulling the license the slightest consideration of how it would impact me and my business. He was just trying to make it easier for himself. By Monday, I knew it was over. He cowardly avoided any sort of follow-up, so I did. The license revocation he sent last week was to 6 people, which included others in licensing, contract administration, finance, and production. For my first reply to the message after getting back to the car, I sent it only to him. Since he was hiding in a corner, I then replied to the whole group with the following: "Please cancel all of my outstanding reissue requests. The fact that this has happened a second time in 2 years of extremely few clearances received is inexcusable. I specifically asked about the Split Ends catalog in April of this year and received the response from you. I'm not aware of any issues with Split Ends. If this is not another case of missing an artist approval stipulation in their contract like last time, then it's your choice to pander to an artist complaint whose catalog you've not done anything with since 1987, in favor of finally destroying this relationship. And add another loss of considerable time and money spent on the completed project on my part because, of course, I've already paid for manufacturing as well to meet the planned August release. After years of having well over 90% of my infrequent inquiries or questions ignored by both of you in licensing, as well as a variety of other licensing-related headaches, I'm shutting the label down. No further clearances needed." My motivation for sending it to the group was so there were no questions on where Rubellan disappeared to. He didn't deserve that discretion. I couldn't stop shaking. I felt I was trapped in a nightmare. Everything I had struggled to build over the last 7 years, destroyed, and by those 2 in licensing that made everything far more difficult than it ever should have been. I had fought uphill for the duration, from the early days with Sony to the final indignities with Universal. No one should have to be subjected to the behavior that they seem to think is acceptable from the lofty arrogance of their positions. I can understand dying for your art, even if your art is polishing up someone else's. But if it's going to be a long, drawn-out, painful process that's only getting worse, it's time to make the hard decisions. It was time to walk away. On July 22nd, 2024, I prepared a lengthy statement that I sent to my mailing list and posted an edited version to social media, stating the label was closing down and why. The response was abrupt and intense. I received literally hundreds of messages on social media and through direct email responses to the newsletter that I was overwhelmed. I would read through anything from a simple sentence of support to multiple paragraphs from heartbroken customers who had been with me on this journey since the start. It felt like a death, and it was. I found myself getting uncharacteristically choked up as I tried to read through the deluge of messages pouring in. I had to stop. It was such an overwhelming feeling of disbelief and sadness that this is how it had to end. I wanted to keep it going and going with an endless stream of great new reissues and happy buyers, spreading the gospel of this little record label that came out of nowhere and made a big impact with some of the best sounding reissues you'd ever hear, from a passionate music fan who turned his dream into a reality. But the unfortunate reality was the dream became a nightmare, and practically from the start. I could power through the manufacturing and distribution issues, but the licensing people were impossible to navigate for a further length of time. It was all ruined, and I had the damaged heart to prove it. I can only hope the list of layoffs eventually comes for both of them, but they should have been tops on the list. I read one foolish comment by someone stating that it was refreshing to see a label stand up for the artist. Seriously? This is your idea of a triumph in the artist's favor? Destroying a small label? Tell you what, when the day comes that the labels start paying artists appropriately for streaming rather than being the extremely greedy monoliths they are, then you'll have a reason to celebrate rather than focusing on this hollow victory. Hey, isn't that a Split Enz song title? How appropriate. Shortly after I sent that final message to UMG, I somewhat regretted it. Not for the reasons you might think, but because after everything I had endured from those two over the years, that was all I could come up with? This would have been my golden opportunity to unload on both of them how extremely rude and disrespectful they had been over the years, thinking I should have said things to them like, "How would you have felt if you had been treated as shitty as you treat your clients?" But then I had to give myself a break. If I would have thought anything I could have said would have made any sort of impact, like causing them to stop for a minute, look at each other, and realize that perhaps they hadn't been treating clients so well, I would have been fooling myself. These people were already such corporate robots, with a complete lack of humanity being firmly ingrained into their makeup. There's no conscience, there's no soul, there was no hope. They were the worst of the worst that corporate America has to offer. It's all about numbers and never about decency. I swam in that poisonous pool for too long out of the love for the music, but it became too toxic. Hand me a towel. I want out. It's true that most of the people in these major labels are not music lovers. They're just doing a job, and one that clearly means very little to them. There were a couple who were obviously fans of music, but they certainly didn't work in the licensing departments. You just got half-assed occasional service by people who would much rather be doing anything other than their jobs. Just to let you know, I never got refunded for the Frenzy license. I monitored that email account for 2 months to see if they had anything to say in that time. There wasn't a single message from anyone. But hey, at least I have the finished product to remind me of the final straw that brought everything down. Here, have a copy. Look! I'm Precision Records handling stampers. After the label closure, I would have moments where the reality of the death would hit me and I felt in a haze. A lot of people seemed in denial about it, thinking the phoenix would somehow rise from the ashes. But I had already done that back in 2019. I couldn't make it a habit. I was out. The idea of trying to work with either of those two corporate drones again would be purely masochistic self-torture. Not an option. The issues with the heart irregularities were not resolving or even reducing. I was still at 2 pills a day, every day. But it's all very fragile. Once the pill kicks in and things smooth out in my chest, if I have a momentary burst of adrenaline or slightly heavy stress, it breaks through the medication and the irregularities start back up. On a good day, a pill can get me through 8 to 12 hours as long as things are calm. A bad day is a different story. Since it was obviously not going away, I agreed to the cardiac ablation procedure. Some people with a regular heartbeat have no awareness of it happening. I'm one of those who feels every single irregular beat, so once it starts, it becomes a vicious circle. I figured with the touted success rate of this procedure, it was worth a shot. I had my heart ablated in February 2025. Within 3 weeks, I knew it had failed. I was right back where I was. The cardiologist suggested I wait for 3 months before coming to any conclusions. Over 4 months later, as of this recording, there has been zero improvement. I guess I'm just broken. Personal resilience and physical tolerance don't always line up. The only other option suggested would be to have an ablation while I'm awake. They would try to trigger the arrhythmia and pinpoint the misfiring location. That sounds pretty terrible. I'll pass. No, I wouldn't suggest a career in the music business to anyone. I look back at all of the people I interacted with in these various record labels, and I'm thankful I at least have a few that I will remember fondly. The final clearance person goes down in history as the most scatterbrained, disorganized, unhelpful person I've ever worked with in my life. When it comes to the primary contact I dealt with through these years and eventually seeing his true colors, as far as I'm concerned, he's the fucking devil. There you have it. A lifetime from optimistic birth to brutal death. If you were expecting anything other than a horror story, that's on you. It was definitely a therapeutic purge to relive the whole sordid tale from start to finish and share with anyone who has had an interest in how it all worked, or didn't work. Ibuprofen has definitely been my friend during the revisiting of this cautionary tale. Thanks to everyone who sent messages during the duration of me powering through putting together this video journey. I appreciate that you took the time to share your thoughts. So many people have told me during the years active and since watching these videos, I don't know how you managed to keep going as long as you did. I would have quit a long time ago. I've never viewed myself as the most tolerant or patient person, but maybe I need to give myself a little more credit, especially after reliving the condensed version of those 7 years over the last couple of months. I don't think there's any question that the label was driven by passion for something very important to me, and it was nice seeing it gradually connecting with others over the years. As for me, I'm retired. I just want to live out these remaining years as peacefully as I can and try to stop this thing from jumping out of my chest. I am so done with corporate America. I'm fine just keeping to myself, doing my bike rides, hitting Cedar Point on a weekly basis, or just being lazy on the couch, likely binging some true crime series, putting all of this behind me and gradually detoxing from the experience. If I do any remastering, it will likely be for myself or the occasional one-off for an indie. Major labels don't care about sound quality. Here's the list of outstanding titles I had in at the time of the closure. There were likely some denials yet to come from these and other titles I was considering submitting, but this is what had yet to receive an official response in either direction. I do want to say a final thank you to all of the music lovers and passionate label followers who have either been with me from the start or hopped on board along the way. It really was your enthusiasm and encouragement that helped me power through so many of these awful situations. I can say I did it while I could and produced 61 titles over the years that I can mostly be proud of. If anything, I'd like to think the label will be remembered fondly for being very unique. A one-man show in an Ohio suburb, completely self-taught and doing everything from his living room couch, producing highly regarded final products. Who would have thought that was even possible a couple of decades ago? I hope that the catalog on the record label with the little green alien in the logo stands as a benchmark of how a well-mastered album can sound, and that all of you continue to enjoy your Rubellan Remasters for years to come.